Hello everyone. In competitive singles, Pokemon are sorted into tiers based on usage. The most used Pokemon are in the top tier, overused, and then the tiers go down from there: underused, rarely used, never used, PU, and finally, zero used. The exact threshold for a Pokemon moving has changed over the years, but at the moment, if a Pokemon fails to achieve 4.52% usage over the course of a month in a higher tier, it will move down to the next tier, and that process will continue until it reaches a tier where it gets sufficient usage. There are some exceptions, but that's generally how it works. Unless a Pokemon doesn't get sufficient usage anywhere, then it ends up in the zero used tier. There is nothing lower. As you could imagine, a lot of terrible Pokemon end up in zero used. I'm sure you'd be shocked to hear that powerhouses like Dewgong, Meganium, and Stonejourner don't even get a 0.5% of usage in the zero used tier. In fact, Tinkatuff gets more usage than these three. Now that's tough. Usage is very strongly correlated with how good a Pokemon is. If a Pokemon is better, people are going to use it more, which will make it rise to higher tiers. So the zero use tier basically being a garbage bin is no surprise. But there are other reasons a Pokemon can end up in the zero use tier, even if it's not bad at all. The Pokemon could just be very metagame dependent. Maybe it's good at countering certain top tiers, but those top tiers fall off or get banned. Maybe that Pokemon is actually really good on a specific archetype, but that archetype doesn't get enough usage to make that Pokemon's tier rise. Maybe that Pokemon is really difficult to fit onto a team, but if it can be properly built around, it performs really well. Or maybe it's just very rarely a good fit, but for some teams that Pokemon will be exactly what it needs. Those are the kind of Pokemon we're going to be looking at today. Pokemon that end up in zero used, the garbage pile of competitive Pokemon, and yet they have a real legitimate role in the highest usage tier, overused. I've selected the 5 that I think are the strongest and have firmly established their viability in overused. Starting off at number 5, we have Charizard. Despite its popularity, Charizard is an unremarkable Pokemon. Its stats are pretty evenly distributed across the board, which really isn't great in the min-maxed world of Scarlet and Violet. Its most impressive stats are a mediocre base 100 speed and base 109 special attack. It has all the fire and flying stabs it could want for the most part. It gets decent status moves like Roost, Roar, and Will-O-Wisp. It has decent coverage, most notably Scorching Sands, and set up with Dragon Dance, Swords Dance, and Belly Drum. Despite its mediocrity, among trash, Charizard has established itself as a solid A tier in zero used. Primarily a special attacker with heavy-duty boots, but it also sometimes runs setup variants. This is not what it does in overused, though. Moltres vastly outclasses it in this heavy-duty boots role. Charizard has something that Moltres doesn't, though: solar power. Solar power is the key to Charizard's overused viability. This boosts Charizard's special attack by 1.5 times, basically giving it a choice specs in Sun. Not for free though, this does cost 1/8 of Charizard's health per turn. Still, this is not a bad deal. Charizard can pair this with a Choice Scarf to become a speedy offense destroyer that one-hit KOs a ton of threats, or it can use Choice Specs to turn into basically the most powerful Pokemon realistically possible ever. With the exception of Flash Fire Pokemon, nothing is tanking a Choice Specs Terrafire Overheat from Charizard and Sun. Defensive Toxapex gets one-hit KO'd. And even Flash Fire Pokemon, a Scorching Sands easily one-hit KOs Heatran and Ceruledge. Charizard is definitely put on a timer thanks to solar power and its incredible weakness to Stealth Rock, but Sun already has great tools to assist. Hatterene is a Sun staple for its incredibly useful Magic Bounce ability to prevent the opponent from setting hazards, but Hatterene also gets Healing Wish, which can give Charizard essentially a second life. So fitting Charizard onto a Sun team isn't as difficult as it sounds. The typical Sun infrastructure supports Charizard very well. Despite its strengths and unrivaled power though, there's a reason Charizard is only number 5 on this list. It faces a very stiff competition, even with its stall-breaking capabilities. Eruption, Hisuian Typhlosion breaks in a similar way, and although not quite as strong, it doesn't have to deal with Solar Power Chip. Walking Wake is also a must-have on all Sun teams, and if you go with a special attack boosting set with Choice Specs, once again, while not as strong as Charizard, it doesn't have the Rock's weakness or the Solar Power Chip, and it's still usually strong enough to shatter stall teams. Choice Specs Iron Moth is another option, which can actually destroy stall and bulky teams with Fiery Dance. None of these breakers are as powerful as Charizard, but they don't really need to be. In a lot of ways, Charizard's power is a bit overkill. You might say, well, then use a Choice Scarf, but without the power of Choice Specs, Charizard loses the one thing it's really good at, one-hit KOing basically everything. It's a trade-off that most players haven't found worth it, and Choice Specs remains the most popular set in High Ladder. I believe that Charizard is viable on Sun teams at a top level, but on most Sun teams, another breaker would do the job better. Next up at number 4, it's Ditto. Ditto is a mono normal type with 48 in every stat and only one move, Transform, but this doesn't really matter at all. Ditto's unique ability Imposter makes it instantly transform into the opponent's Pokemon, copying typing, moves, every stat except for HP, and stat boosts. A lot of things aren't copied though. If your Ditto is statist, Imposter won't heal it. If it's damaged, Imposter also won't heal that. Whatever item your Ditto is holding will still be there. And if your opponent has used Terra, that won't be copied to Ditto. So if you use an Imposter Ditto on a Terra normal Dragonite, you'll still be a Dragon and Flying type. This can be good though, since Ditto can use its own Terra. The Ditto on this team has Terra Ghost, which can help it steal a sweep and then avoid being revenge killed by Dragonite. The way Ditto steals sweeps is by using the Choice Scarf. No setup sweepers use a Choice Scarf, obviously, since it would lock them into a setup move. So when Ditto uses Imposter on a setup sweeper and copies their boosts, it will almost always be faster. Choice Scarf is by far the best set on Ditto. It's used on nearly 100% of them. No other set is consistent, as stopping sweepers is what Ditto does best. This is its role in every format. It does the exact same thing in Zero Used as it does in Overused, Imposter Choice Scarf. Copy threatening opposing Pokemon and setup sweepers, shut down their sweep, and try and start your own. An experienced opponent will see that you have a Ditto and usually just avoid setting up altogether, or limiting setup to the extent that their team can deal with it being copied. Ditto often puts immense pressure on your opponent's team without even entering the field. This setup stopping effect makes Ditto amazing against hyper offense teams. Most hyper offense teams lose on team preview to Ditto. There's simply nothing they can do when stat boosting, their main way of winning, is mostly cut off. Now, Ditto is not a complete hard stop to set up. It won't copy the booster energy effect, so against booster energy Iron Valiant and Iron Moth, Ditto is forced into a speed tie. Unburden also isn't traced by Ditto, so if you run into a Hawlucha, you're probably in trouble. Some sweepers are also just pretty solid against Ditto. Kingambit resisting its own stabs and having a way higher HP stat than Ditto makes it unfortunately not very good at stopping the tier's most used setup Pokemon. Still, the vast majority of sweepers hate seeing Ditto, and its anti-hyper offense capabilities are second to none. Ditto also has very strong matchup into stall teams, because it gets its PP refreshed every time it activates Imposter, 5 PP on every move the opponent has. So Ditto can burn turns against stall teams forever. It can copy a Gliscor, use Stealth Rock, and slowly wear down the opponent's Defog PP. It can heal its status with Blissey's Natural Cure. It can click recovery moves after copying basically anything, or heal without even having to click a move by copying a Regenerator Pokemon. Ditto is great against the extremes, stall and hyper offense, but not so good against teams more in the middle range, balance and offense. This makes Ditto a king in early metagames. When massive changes occur, like a DLC being added or a new game coming out, Hyper Offense is usually the strongest archetype at first. It's fairly easy to discover threatening setup sweepers, whereas solid defensive cores and counterplay to the plethora of new offensive threats takes longer to develop. And when Hyper Offense is everywhere, Stall soon follows, as it's often the best archetype to counter Hyper Offense. So in these early metagames, Stall and Hyper Offense are everywhere, and Ditto is amazing. Ditto has achieved overused level usage several times in Generation 9, always around these major tier changes. That deserves respect and gives it a place on this list. As the metagame has stabilized, Ditto has become worse and worse, but it still remains one of the best counters to Hyper Offense and Stall out there. For now, Ditto is nowhere near overused level usage, but just wait till Generation 10. At least for a little bit of time, Ditto will be back on top again. Now let's move on to number 3, it's Orthworm. Orthworm is a mono steel type that's disappointing in almost every way. It has a great 145 base defense, but its next highest stat is attack, which is only 85. base 70 HP, base 65 speed, and a devastating base 55 special defense makes Orthworm a generally unimpressive wall. Its move pool is nothing crazy either. It mostly just gets the usual assortment of ground, rock, and steel type attacks. It does get body press though, which is nice, so it can hit fairly hard with that 145 base defense. It also gets both spikes and stealth rock. Orthworm was an overused menace in the past with Shedtail, but that got banned, removing the only remarkable thing about Orthworm. That is, except for its ability Earth Eater, which is one of the best in the game. Orthworm is healed by 25% when hit by a ground move, an incredible ability for a steel type. Levitate is often considered an amazing ability, but in almost every case, Earth Eater is better. In Zero used, Orthworm isn't a top-level threat by any means, but it has a respectable place in the tier. It's used as a spike and stealth rock setter, and also a setup sweeper with coil and iron defense plus body press sets. In Overused, the power level is much too high for a setup variant of Orthworm to be effective, but the hazard setting sets are actually quite viable. Orthworm matches up well into many top tiers like Landorus, Great Tusk, Kingambit, Gliscor, and it can stack hazards up on them. It mostly functions very similarly to Skarmory, but thanks to being a grounded steel type with Earth Eater instead of steel flying, Orthworm matches up quite well into Kyurem. It also gets Heavy Slam, which Skarmory lacks, allowing Orthworm to threaten Hatterene, an increasingly popular anti-hazard measure. Orthworm can also Terra Ghost to spin block without losing its ground-absorbing capabilities, another significant pro over Skarmory. And it's also one of the best Dragonite answers out there. As long as Orthworm is healthy, very few Dragonite sets can handle an Iron Defense plus Body Press Orthworm. Now, despite all of these positives, Orthworm is still slow and has horrible special bulk. In a tier as powerful as Scarlet and Violet Overused, a tier which also has 6 steel types, there's almost always going to be a better option than Orthworm. But sometimes it'll be exactly what the team needs. Orthworm has definitely proven itself, reaching high ladder rankings on several occasions, with its peak at rank 6 by the user Wanawa8724. Funny enough, Wanawa is a community helper on my Discord server, and I think he may be a high-ranking member of an Orthworm-based cult. Anyway, the link to my Discord is in the description if you're interested in joining. Don't worry, the cultists are mostly pretty nice. And before we move on to number 2, if you're enjoying the video so far, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps out a lot. Alright, now at number 2 we have Whimsicott. Whimsicott is a fairy and grass type, a very solid defensive typing, but quite disappointing offensively, at least at first glance. It has pretty awful stats, a great base 116 speed, but every other stat is in the range of 60 to 85, most notably of all for us, a special attack stat of only 77. Its move pool is pretty disappointing for the most part. It gets the fairy and grass moves you'd expect, but no great setup moves or any notable coverage other than Shadow Ball. It does have some decent moves on the utility side, most notably Encore. When paired with the ability Prankster, Encore is extremely potent. Prankster gives status moves +1 priority, and when paired with Whimsicott's amazing speed, this means its Encore will almost always go first, locking the opponent into a setup move, status move, or whatever the Whimsicott wants you to be locked into. In Zero used, this is mostly what Whimsicott does. It's a fast pivot, usually with heavy-duty boots, using Moonblast, Prankster Encore, U-turn for pivoting, and Giga Drain or Energy Ball for the grass stab. It sometimes also goes all in on power, using choice specs and spamming Moonblast while outspeeding almost everything. It performs both of these roles very well. It's the 10th most used Pokemon in the Zero used tier. In Overused, though, Whimsicott does something completely different. It doesn't use Prankster at all, but rather Chlorophyll, which doubles its speed in Sun. Whimsicott uses Moonblast, Giga Drain, Shadow Ball, and Growth to double its special attack in Sun, typically with a Life Orb to help give more power to Whimsicott's poor base 77 special attack, and the Life Orb chip damage isn't as big of a deal when Whimsicott can heal with Giga Drain. Thanks to how fast Whimsicott is naturally, when combined with Chlorophyll, Whimsicott only needs 80 speed EVs to outspeed Choice Scarf Darkrai, basically the fastest regular Pokemon in the metagame. This is a feat Venusaur can't achieve, even with a timid nature and maximum speed investment. And Whimsicott does it while running Modest to boost its power further, and throwing a lot of EVs into HP to become bulkier. But the advantages of Whimsicott don't end here. Some teams often struggle with dragon types, so a fairy like Whimsicott isn't just a great offensive threat, it's solid defensively as well. And as a sweeper, I would say Whimsicott is a lot harder to stop than Venusaur. Whimsicott resists the strongest priority moves in the tier, Grassy Glide, Thunderclap, and Sucker Punch, and it can Terra Ghost to become immune to Dragonite's Extreme Speed, which also powers up Shadow Ball. Whimsicott's typing is also amazing against Raging Bolt, resisting Electric and being immune to Dragon. Opposing Raging Bolt getting a free Photosynthesis boost is tough for a lot of Sun teams to deal with, and Whimsicott helps out. Now, this Pokemon still has major limitations. It's quite frail, not that powerful, and it can struggle to find setup opportunities. But unlike Charizard, Whimsicott offers Sun a lot that is unique, and actually helps counter a lot of the struggles Sun teams typically have. Not every Sun team will need a Whimsicott, but it deserves to be considered a Sun staple. It's no surprise to me that the user Kitten Lasers managed to hit rank 1 with this team. Okay, before we get to number 1, let's go over some honorable mentions. First up, I want to shout out Torkoal and Ninetales. These are both in Zero used, but they're actually terrible in Zero used because their Sun-setting ability Drought is banned. Ironically, both of these Pokemon are way better in Overused than they are in Zero used due to that lower tier Drought ban. Torkoal has been overused several times this generation, and it's close to the 4.52% threshold as of making this video. Both Ninetales and Torkoal easily deserve the number 1 spot on this list, definitely even more than the number 1 I actually selected if we're ranking strictly off of overused viability. I decided to exclude them though, mostly because everyone who plays Overused knows that these Pokemon are viable, and they're only viable because they set Sun for strong Photosynthesis Pokemon and other abusers, not really for their own merits. So having them on this list would just feel cheap and not really in the spirit of this video. I wanted to talk about niche cases where Zero-used Pokemon found viability in Overused by offering something unique or taking advantage of specific metagame conditions, and Torkoal and Ninetales don't fit that bill. The next honorable mention goes to Toxicroak. Toxicroak is a top tier in Zero used, usually running offensive Life Orb or Choice Scarf sets, but it also has a very different and very solid role in Overused. Toxicroak's Dry Skin not only absorbs Ivy Cudgel, but it heals 1/8 of its health per turn in the rain, and thanks to its poison fighting typing, it basically resists all of the other attacks Ogerpon Wellspring typically uses, like Knock Off, U-Turn, and Power Whip. It typically uses a defensive Rocky Helmet support set with Drain Punch, Knock Off, Toxic, and Encore. Despite its terrible defensive stats, 83 HP and 65 defense, its typing and ability allow it to shut down top tiers like Darkrai, Zamazenta, Kingambit, Hisuian Samurott, and of course, Ogerpon Wellspring. If Toxicroak was on this list, it would probably take the number 1 spot. It's an incredibly useful tool for rain teams. The reason it's not on this list though, is that I already made an entire video about Toxicroak and Overused, and I didn't just want to repeat all that. If you want to watch me break down how I made Toxicroak work, and my process of building the team that ended up getting to rank 6 and beating some of the best players of all time, that video is linked in the description. Now with that out of the way, it's time for number 1. It's Farigiraf. Farigiraf has a seemingly disappointing normal and psychic typing. Not very impressive offensively. Its stats though are a lot better than most Zero-used Pokemon. It has a very nice base 120 HP, decent 70 in both defenses, and a solid 110 special attack. Its base 60 speed is pretty terrible, but it often uses Trick Room to turn this bad stat into an advantage. Its move pool is decent, but nothing to write home about. It gets the typical array of solid psychic moves like Psyshock, Psychic Noise, Stored Power and such, healing with Wish, and coverage on the special side with Energy Ball, Shadow Ball, and Thunderbolt. For setup, it gets Agility, Nasty Plot, and Calm Mind. What really makes Farigiraf special, and get the number 1 place on this list, is its ability Armor Tail. This blocks priority moves from hitting Farigiraf. It doesn't just remove their priority, it makes you entirely immune. The majority of Farigiraf, both in Zero-used and Overused, will use Nasty Plot and Trick Room. The plan is pretty simple. Use Nasty Plot once or twice, use Trick Room, and get as many kills as possible. And it doesn't matter if you're at really low health, your opponent won't be able to pick you off with a priority move. Oddly enough, in zero used, Farigiraf is a pretty mid-tier Pokemon. A respected sweeper, but it doesn't get a lot of usage. If there was a lower tier, Farigiraf would drop out of zero used. I first tried Farigiraf in Overused on a live stream, and I had low expectations, but it kept surprising me. The team not only got 8 wins and 0 losses, but Farigiraf itself was putting in crazy work. The reason Farigiraf is so surprisingly potent in Overused is that it does an excellent job of taking advantage of the metagame. Overused has so many insanely powerful sweepers: Dragonite, Kingambit, Ironmoth, Iron Valiant, Ceruledge, Darkrai, Gholdengo, Kyurem, Raging Bolt, Zamazenta. All of these Pokemon have incredible sweeping potential, and when you add Terra into the mix, defensively preparing a team is absolutely impossible. So the solution is use priority. Powerful priority like Rillaboom Grassy Glide, Dragonite Extreme Speed, Raging Bolt Thunderclap, Kingambit Sucker Punch, Scizor Bullet Punch, Low Kick's First Impression. This is the main way that Overused teams deal with all these super powered Terra sweepers that are running the tier. Revenge kill them with priority. Priority is such a vital part of Scarlet and Violet Overused metagame that a team without priority is usually a bad team. Particularly for more offensive teams, trying to answer even half the threats in the tier with a defensive core isn't feasible, so most teams rely very heavily on priority. Then enters Farigiraf, a sweeper that these countermeasures are entirely ineffective against. The set I used was Nasty Plot, Trick Room, Terra Blast, and Shadow Ball with Terra Fighting. Being a normal type special attacker, Farigiraf can use Terra Blast normal on its own as a solid attack, but if it does need to Terra, Fighting and Ghost coverage is very solid. When an offensive team faces a Farigiraf, it's usually in big trouble. These are the teams that count on priority the most. Now, of course, when Trick Room runs out, any fast Pokemon can outspeed a Farigiraf and attempt to revenge kill it, but as I said earlier, this Pokemon has a really solid bulk. And if equipped with the leftovers, you'll be healing the entire time Trick Room is up. If your opponent fails to revenge kill, you can set Trick Room again, and even if you're only left at 2% of your health, well, no priority move is going to be able to finish you off. It might seem like I'm giving Farigiraf too much credit, but if you think I am, just try the team out for yourself. All teams used for background footage are linked in the description. So those are my top 5, but there are a lot more zero-used Pokemon that I think are viable and overused, and even more that might be viable. As of making this video, there are 191 unique Pokemon or forms in the zero-used tier, and I'd say about 40 of them have some role in overused. If you want to see me discuss some of these Pokemon, let me know. Tell me in the comments what your favorite zero-used Pokemon is. Mine is Clawitzer. I think the design is awesome and its shiny form is incredible. Also, before I wrap up this video, I want to address that some of the Pokemon on this list might not be zero-used forever. Every month, that 4.52% usage threshold triggers tier shifts. None of the Pokemon on this list are close to moving that I know of, but hey, maybe Whimsicott pops off and never used and rises a tier. Or maybe even Farigiraf goes crazy and goes all the way to overused. Who's to say? But at least at the time of making this video, all of these Pokemon are zero-used. Well, if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.